My name's Tiffany, and I am a Developer Advocacy Lead at Shopify. I work on a partners education team for Shopify, and I speak, teach, and write all about front-end development, theming, specifically for developers and anybody building on the Shopify platform. Just to give you a bit of background, for those of you who don't know, Shopify is a complete commerce solution that allows you to set up an online store to sell your goods. It lets you organize products, create collections, customize your storefront, accept credit card payments, all that kind of stuff, and easily respond to your orders. Because you guys are developers, Shopify offers a partner program, and it's free to sign up. You can easily sign up at shopify.com/partners. And this is specifically for developers who want to build on Shopify, whether that's building apps or themes. And with a partner account, you get access to all your API keys, the ability to use our APIs and SDKs, as well as check out what Shopify, the platform, actually looks like by setting up a development store, which is like a sandbox store. And so all you have to do is go to shopify.com/partners and sign up for a free account. So let's get started. Let's start at the University of California, Berkeley. In the early 1970s, UC Berkeley, or any city in the US for that matter, was pretty tough to get around, especially for anybody that had any kind of disability. Specifically anybody in a wheelchair, because the sidewalks and curbs, the curbs didn't really exist, in the sense that there were no things like curb cuts. It was at UC Berkeley one night in 1972 where students decided, as an act of protest, to pour concrete into the shape of a crude ramp on campus. This crude ramp actually provided the much needed mobility for students on campus that were using wheelchairs to get up and off of sidewalks. A curb cut, which is a solid concrete ramp, usually slopes down from the top of a sidewalk down to an adjoining street. And back in the 60s, this wasn't something that existed, right? It was just curbs, and then you would have to step off. Pressed by activists in the same year, Berkeley installed its first official curb cut at an intersection on Telegraph Avenue. Hundreds of curb cuts followed, and then hundreds of thousands all across the country. Curb cuts, which are meant for wheelchair users to get on and off of sidewalks, help all sorts of people. They aid cyclists, people with strollers, delivery people, or anybody crossing the street that's just not paying attention. This phenomena is what's known as the curb cut effect. Essentially, things intended to benefit those with disabilities wind up actually benefiting everyone. What this means is building an accessible experience can often lead to better experience for all. And this can be applied to when we're building accessible experiences online. Similarly, closed captioning, which was originally meant to benefit the hearing impaired, helps anyone who has trouble processing auditory information. This includes people who are watching television in a noisy place, or for people like me who really just enjoys watching terrible UK reality television and has a hard time understanding certain accents. These types of innovations help everyone, not just those with disabilities. So meeting the needs of online shoppers includes those with varying physical and cognitive abilities. In this session, I'm going to talk to you about our own experiences at Shopify, looking at accessibility and building accessible storefronts, and how the majority of cases, and improvement in the case of accessibility, can actually lead to benefiting all users of your website. So you, as a designer or a developer or a project manager, might already be feeling energized or excited about building an accessible experience. Maybe it's because you understand the importance of accessibility online, or it's actually a requirement or legislative concern for you. Or you might just be driven by building inclusive experiences. Whatever it is, you're ready, and now's where the real work actually starts. But figuring out how to get started can be a daunting task. how do you start ramping up and knowing what's expected of an accessible site? Do you read blog posts, community guidelines, ask users? If you've been thinking about web accessibility for a short time, you've probably heard of WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or also known as the W3C. The goal of WCAG is to provide a single shared standard for web accessibility. So that sounds like a great place to start. However, when you start to read the WCAG guidelines, it can really quickly become overwhelming for a person or a team, especially if you're new to accessibility. This checklist, with its many examples, test criteria, suggested techniques, is really fantastic. But it's totally natural to feel some confusion and hesitation when you encounter certain criteria for the first time. For example, multiple ways. More than one way is available to locate a web page within a set of web pages, except where the web page is a result of or step in a process. I feel like this could make anybody question whether or not they really understand what's being asked of them. WCAG, specifically WCAG 2.0, is considered the gold standard for web accessibility criteria. But it's not your only option to start learning about what makes an accessible website. The WebAim organization, for example, provides a list of recommendations that map to WCAG criteria. In their own words, they're striving to provide a simple checklist that focuses on HTML-based applications. Alternatively, the Ally project is an open source effort to make it easier to implement accessibility on the web. They have different patterns and technical demos, resources to help you understand in simple language the different disabilities, as well as suggested events to attend and learn more about accessibility. In fact, when you start looking around for resources on the web, you can become inundated with blog posts and podcasts and YouTube channels. But this question of how to start has come full circle. And even with all the resources at our disposal, how does a team actually begin making your work more accessible? And that's the position Shopify's themes team found themselves in this past year. For context, the Shopify themes team maintains 10 uniquely designed and coded themes. These appear in our theme store on the Shopify platform. For those of you who've used WordPress or something like that before, it's a similar kind of thing. And in looking at each one of these themes on its own, we're assessing at least 20 different templates, from homepage to blog posts to product pages. And each page is made up of different components. Navigation, which has drop-down menus, image galleries that are interactive, search forms that are animated and redirect a user to a new page, and product forms whose content dynamically changes and updates as a shopper interacts with it. Once you start mentally adding up all of these different things going on and seeing the work ahead of you, you immediately must ask yourself, can I get a machine to do this? As developers, the first thing that pops into most of our heads is, how can I automate this? Well, when it comes to accessibility, tooling can be a great place to start, especially if you've never done any kind of previous accessibility work before. One such tool is Lighthouse. Lighthouse is an open source automated tool for improving the quality of web pages. It has audits for performance, accessibility, progressive web apps, and more. It's built by Google, and you can find it in the Chrome Dev Tools panel under the Audits tab. Here, you can check off what it is that you want to include in the audit. In our case, we want to audit for accessibility. And after a couple seconds, it'll return back to you a detailed report. Axe is another open source tools library for accessibility testing. It differentiates itself from other tools in that it presents only what it deems to have a 0 false positive rate. The point is to ensure that anything that it does point out is always relevant. Additionally, both of these tools can be built into automated workflows like your continuous integration. There's some really amazing detailed tutorials on Lighthouse CI as well as Axe CI that you can look up after this talk. If you just quickly Google Lighthouse CI or Axe CI, they'll come up. And they're actually both by the people who built them at Google and for Axe. Some of the things these tools audit against include, but aren't limited to, proper attributes on HTML elements. For example, images having alt attributes, color contrast, which analyzes body text against its background color, HTML structure and usage, which ensures like HTML tags have the proper attributes on them, area attributes that follow best practices. So I just mentioned something called area. And for those of you who don't know, let me explain a little bit more. If you'll often, if not already, hear and see the acronym AREA as you learn more about accessibility. Y AREA actually stands for the Web Accessibility Initiative, Rich Internet Applications, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And it's a specification published by the W3C on how to build accessible web pages, more specifically dynamic content. Basically, the specification is comprised of area roles, states, and properties that are to assistive technology as CSS is to HTML. Area dictates the rendering of the non-visual experience. So incorrect area might actually misrepresent the experience for somebody who's using a screen reader. So it's really important to understand how to use area before putting them in your markup. For example, placing the area expanded attribute on a button like this to indicate whether or not a mobile menu is open is super helpful for a non-sighted user. An area role is a promise to a user. So using a role without filling the promise of that role is similar to making a place order button that abandons an order and empties a shopping cart. That would be a terrible experience. And stop, right? This comes directly from the area documentation, and it describes the importance of using area roles, proper area attributes. It's actually from a chapter, if you can see here, no area is better than bad area. But it's really important to remember that tooling has its limits, and you can't automate everything, unfortunately. So these tools are great at what they do, looking at a static site and then checking for markup errors. But websites aren't static. They move, they resize, refloat, and do things. And so we need to think about the people actually using our website and what it's like to use our website, instead of just looking at what exists and what doesn't in the markup. So looking at this theme, which is the narrative theme from Shopify on mobile, there's a problem with this design. And it's a type of error that an automated tool wouldn't catch. The price for the product, the original price, is shown in gray, which is breaking a guiding principle of accessibility, that color alone is not enough to convey meaning. Now, in reality, the product page doesn't look like that. It looks like this. We're striking through the text, because that would be really terrible if we just had two prices side by side. But an automated tool wouldn't know that this text is supposed to indicate the original price. Tests would have passed because the tool would have looked at the color contrast between that text and its background and given you a thumbs up. By not relying solely on color alone to convey meaning, we can help users who might be colorblind or have low vision. Both groups have difficulty discerning colors and are therefore at a disadvantage when interpreting certain designs. In addition to those groups, it's also a quick win to show the price for anybody who's just viewing our website really clearly. I'm trying to highlight a realization that we had internally when the themes team started making our own themes more accessible at Shopify. An automated tool can tell you about the markup in your browser, but it can't tell you about the experience you're delivering to your users. This was a turning point in deciding how to audit our own themes for accessibility. So if you want to create an accessible experience, you have to think about a user's journey from beginning to end. Findings from automation tools are great, automated tools are great, but they are standalone items devoid of context. And one improvement early on in a journey can be negated by a blocker later on. So our team started thinking about auditing not pages, but tasks. What are the tasks an online shopper is trying to complete, and what are the steps along the way? Completing a purchase, for example, has a number of steps. I've already covered one, when viewing products, not relying on color alone. Let's go to the next step and talk about some of the accessibility concerns for browsing a product's many options. There's something inaccessible about the way these product variant selectors are set up on the page. These drop-downs don't have a visible label. Right now, there's no way of knowing what's orange and what's black, the lenses or the frames. Now, a common solution that I see has two steps. The first is the label appears as the first item in your drop-down. How many people have done this before? No one will admit it, okay. And the second is that area label is then applied to the input. Screen readers will announce the label to somebody who is visually impaired, and an automated tool would give us a thumbs up. However, this isn't a great experience. When you look at this design, it puts certain groups at a disadvantage. How many of you in the audience are now trying to recall which drop-down is frames and which drop-down is lenses? Okay, few. And you're doing a frantic process of elimination to try to figure out what exists and what doesn't. What you're experiencing is the same thing that a number of users are feeling. That a visible label greatly reduces the mental burden when browsing product options. So who does this benefit? A visible label helps groups with certain cognitive impairments or difficulty concentrating. But as we already established, a visible label is useful to everyone. If you had to turn away from your phone to go get your credit card or check a text message, it shouldn't feel like starting over when you come back to finish your purchase. I mentioned this before, but product pages often have dynamic content, images and text that change based on our interactions. In this video, changing product options will first update the amount of stock from 3 to 1. And then once I update one more time, you'll notice that the button switches to sold out. These changes are really apparent to a sighted user, but not people who are blind or might have low vision. These shoppers should know about the changes in price and availability as well. So we need a solution for people who rely on a screen reader when using the internet. And we can use Area to help us work with screen readers. In this case, Area Live tells a screen reader that a certain content might update in the future, and when it does, to actually tell that user. This is often called a live region. In practice, it looks like this. You wrap the price and availability in an HTML element with the Area Live attribute on it. Here I've set the value to polite, so updates are announced, but they won't actually interrupt any other messages that are being read out to the person using a screen reader. Now, when the text changes from 3 available to 1 available, the screen reader will tell the user that the text has changed. So I'm going to browse the options again, but this time with a screen reader turned on. That's VoiceOver on a Mac, that gray box. And when I switch from khaki to moss, you can see that the availability is now announced. So using live regions is a consideration for people who rely on screen readers. When shopping online, they want to know just as much as anyone else if certain products are becoming more or less expensive, or if they need to act fast to grab that last item left. And to grab that last one left, you're going to have to add it to the cart. And this is the next step in our key task. When you click on the Add to Cart button, it opens the cart drawer in this theme, and our item's actually added to the cart. But not everybody uses a mouse to navigate online. People who are visually impaired might rely on a keyboard or braille display, and others might not actually have the fine motor skills to easily use a mouse. So if you're not using a mouse, the focus styling or the focus ring in your HTML is what actually shows you where you are on the page. What this means is it's really important to make sure that any interactive elements have focus styling, because keyboard users rely on it. So let's navigate instead using the tab key this time. And when we tab to the add to cart button and hit enter, the same action should actually happen as when you click on it with a mouse. The keyboard focus is then moved to the cart drawer, and the next tab key press sets the focus on the close button. So when building drawers like these, or modal windows, for example, it's really important to have the close button inside the focus drawer containing element. That way it can be easily tabbed to when the focus is switched. Having the close button as the first child inside the container makes for a far better user experience. That way people can easily navigate to and dismiss a drawer or a pop-up. It's also super helpful to provide the ability to close one of these items on press of the escape key. When someone's navigating with the tab key, it's important that we must preserve the meaning and operability of web page content. And that's what's known as focus management. In the most recent version of WCAG, there's a chapter about avoiding keyboard trapping. If focus is moved to a component of the page via keyboard, then that focus should be able to exit that same component of the page also using the keyboard. This doesn't necessarily mean that keyboard trapping is a bad thing, that focus trapping is a bad thing, so long as you make sure to give somebody the option to exit that focus, that trapped focus. So right now my focus is actually trapped in the cart drawer. When I tab through, I loop through the focusable elements over and over again. And I can choose to exit by ending up on the close button and hitting enter on my keyboard. This way, I'm able to exit this trapped focus using the same navigational tool I entered it in with, which is the keyboard. So to trap focus within an element, you're going to have to write some JavaScript, right? There's no out-of-the-box solution to do this. Unless you're using Slate, specifically for Shopify theming. Slate is Shopify's official toolkit for developing themes. And at Unite, which is Shopify's developer conference that just happened a few weeks back, we officially launched a beta version of Slate 1.0, which in it is included this JavaScript helper called Ali.js. So Ali.js is a helper JavaScript file that comes automatically with Slate. It provides a way to trap focus and remove trap focus using the trap focus and remove trap focus methods. It's really straightforward. So in this example, a drawer is being triggered to open and close based on a button with a click event. We can trap the focus using the trap focus method from Ali.js to trap the focus in the cart drawer. So container here specifies what it is that you want to trap focus within, and element to focus sets an element for selection after the focus is trapped. Strong focus management helps both keyboard users with a range of abilities as well as the visually impaired. It ensures that people with experiences that are similar, it ensures that people who have these experiences are similar to those who are using a mouse navigating online. So it's really important to remember that people can choose not to use a mouse. There are many tasks that are just faster using a keyboard. How many people use a keyboard to navigate most of the time on their computers or when you're coding? You switch back and forth between applications using a tab key. Sometimes it's just a lot easier to use a keyboard than it is a mouse to try to find a tiny little close button especially on a Mac on a window. I know for myself as a developer, I've become accustomed to using keyboard shortcuts when navigating certain interfaces. And great focus management and keyboard support is important for any user. No one should be confused when pressing enter doesn't submit a form, and you should be able to close and open things easily using your keyboard. So there's one final step to consider before we reach the end of our key task, and that's that some users might want to modify their cart before they check out. So let's modify the cart on mobile instead, using a touch interface instead of precise focus states. All of a sudden, Brooklyn, which is this theme, its design places a user at a disadvantage. When I put my thumb over the number input, this is what I see. Even though I don't suffer from a motor impairment, I still risk clicking the subtract button and clearing my cart by mistake. So let's modify the cart on mobile instead, using a touch interface. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. According to material design guidelines, touch target should be at least 48 pixels by 48 pixels, right? That way a 10 millimeter finger pad can easily use them. The WCAG recommendation is a little bit smaller. They recommend 44 by 44 pixels. And touch target size should always be a consideration for mobile design. This doesn't mean that the icons themselves in your designs always need to be a minimum size of 44 pixels by 44 pixels. That would probably make for some really ugly designs. Rather, the touch targets do. And we can do this with CSS really easily. An accessibility change does not always mean that you have to alter a design. Instead, designers and developers should work together to build accessible experiences that look and feel great for everyone. Touch target size does not only concern people using mobile devices. Laptops with touch screens are commonplace now. Devices of all sizes use touch as a means of navigation. This man with cerebral palsy has difficulty with fine motor skills, but a large touch screen actually makes it a lot easier for him to navigate and interact with applications. So thinking more about the actual device brings up some new opportunities. In this theme that we've created called narrative, when you modify the cart quantities, in this theme, when you modify the cart quantities, the phone actually brings up the QWERTY the number keyboard, not the full QWERTY one. And the number pad has much larger touch targets on it, which has added benefits, right? And it's actually really simple to bring up the number keypad. All you have to do on an input is set the appropriate attribute of type to number. Super straightforward. There are specialized keyboards for telephone numbers, emails, dates, and even search results. And by using the correct type of input, you're optimizing the user's experience with less typing and better precision, which is something that everybody wants, right? This is a great example of how one small change in the name of accessibility can actually be a big win for anybody using your website and the overall user experience. So I've been showing you how our designs benefit people that can benefit people that may experience a variety of disabilities, right? From hearing loss to trouble concentrating, motor impairments to low vision. But there's a group that's known to experience all of these types of impairments that we should be thinking about. And this group is mentioned right in the WCAG guidelines, that as people get older, their abilities change. Someone who once had no problem using a mouse can develop arthritis. Someone's vision can blur over time with cataracts. And who gets older? You do. All of us do, actually. So when we build better, more accessible websites, and we improve the experience for our current users, how they may change in the future, and also for ourselves, we're just building better products. Thinking about accessibility as a concern for older users was initially brought to my attention at another conference in Toronto, Canada, by Makoto Yuki. He's the chairman of the Web Accessibility Infrastructure Committee in Japan, and he has a unique interest in older users of the internet. Japan actually has the oldest average population in the world, with over a quarter above the age of 65. And this age group is expected to continue to grow in the coming decades. But there's something else that's really interesting about this group. Approximately 70% of Japanese over 65 are actually using the internet, and a growing trend from years before, and a trend that we can see across all age groups. And when you look around the world, you see the exact same trend repeated. In the United Kingdom, over recent years, the number of women aged 65 to 74 using the internet went from less than half to 75%. That's the largest jump in any age group. And in Canada, where I'm from, An estimated 81% of Canadians aged 65 to 74 are actively using the internet. So if you're going to leave this session today with just one takeaway, I want it to be an understanding that making websites or experience or tasks more accessible is rarely benefiting some small subset of the population. A more accessible website will create a better experience for multiple groups across a range of abilities and forward into the future. And that person in the future could be a friend, could be a parent, or you. Thanks. Cool. Enjoy your lunch, everyone. There's no meat. Does anybody have any questions since no one's taking my mic from me? Yep. As an overall percentage, I think it varies from country to country. I think I don't have an exact number for you, so I couldn't just pull one off the top of my head, but I'm sure you could quickly Google that. I would say the majority of things that you're changing in your website, especially in the name of accessibility, generally just create better experiences for anybody who's using your website. One really quick and easy thing that you can do is tab through your website and see if you can do all of the same things that you can do with a mouse. It's a really straightforward, simple test, and oftentimes you'll find that, especially if a website or an application has some kind of interactive component, people haven't thought about that. So as you tab through, focus gets trapped maybe in a slider or something like that, and then all of a sudden you can't exit out. Or focus isn't trapped, or it goes off the page and you don't actually know what you're focused on or what you could be clicking on because nothing advances or is visually even seen. So you're asking whether or not to calculate the return on investment? What do you build right now? Okay. Yeah. So right now, anybody here, how many people build websites? Okay. You're building a website. Do you make it desktop only right now? So everybody here is probably building a responsive website right now, correct? Yeah. And so I think the same thing needs to happen with accessibility in the future, right? It becomes part of something that we just think about when we start a project. It's not an add-on or something that we have to consider as part of, you don't come up with different pricing now for a responsive website versus a not responsive website. That's not even a thing that we talk about. It's just assume that if I'm asking you to build me a website, it's gonna work on everything, right? And so I think when we think about building accessible experiences and building accessible applications, it's something that we just need to start doing and thinking about it from the start. And it's a lot easier to build an accessible application if you're thinking about it when you start off versus at the very end and then trying to shove stuff in, right? If you built a website now, desktop first, and then tried to go backwards instead of mobile first, it's a lot tougher in a lot of cases to then shove that content and make it laid out properly for mobile, right? So I think thinking about it in that way is probably a better way of sort of approaching the problem, but yeah. Okay, I'm gonna exit off the stage because I feel like they're trying to, oh, there's more questions. Yeah. Our shop, so we just put out a new press release about GDPR, so you can quickly find that. Shopify themes themselves are just a skin on a Shopify store. And so in terms of like looking at their accessibility and that kind of thing, we're currently working towards. So like we don't have a completely compliant like theme that exists currently, because there's so many components, and also people can customize exactly how they're doing things and inject their own code. So there's no way for us to like sign off and say like this website is 100% accessible to W3C or like WCAG specifications or something like that, because somebody could have put in their own HTML in their site or whatever it is. So one thing that I would say is it's a process, and we're all working towards it, and it's not something that's super easy, otherwise everybody would have already done it, and nobody would be in the session, or even less people. And so I think it's just important to think about just moving forward, like even if you're working with a designer and you're starting off a project, it's something as simple as like making sure the color contrast on the designs from the beginning are like high enough so that everybody can see. That's like a really easy change. Or like, again, tabbing through. Like those are things that like improve the overall experience for anybody viewing or using your website or app. Cool. Thanks, everyone.